Okay, so the first build that I released back in September was the Bumble B2. Now this little plane was the first build of Season 1 of my build series, and it's a tiny little plane, very, very easy to make, and okay, so the first build we had was the Bumble B2. Now this little airplane was considered one of the world's smallest airplanes, and there were other planes that have been built that also take that title as well, but the Bumblebee 2 was one of the first because it was built in the 1970s. The other planes were built a little later. So, but I will be building those planes in the future, and again, they are quite small because I have already built them. I just need to make tutorials on them, but they are very tiny and going to be very easy to make. So, stick around for those ones. So anyways, we'll get on to the second one, which is the Learjet 35. Now this aircraft here was one of the bigger ones that I released, well, slightly bigger. It's a little business jet and everything. I really enjoyed building this thing, and you guys seem to have also enjoyed this tutorial. And expect more of these private jets to show up on my channel because they're very fun to make, and they can have some really nice interiors as well. So the third build that I released, which was my first naval build, this is a Japanese World War II submarine. Now it's actually a mini submarine, and this is what it's called. It's called the Type A. I'm not going to pronounce the actual Japanese saying of it, but there it is there. So this little submarine was my first naval build, like I just mentioned, and I will be, and as you know from watching the 12 build series, or the 10 build series, but I increased it to 12 this time, there is a boat coming up, the LS3, which is a German torpedo boat. So this was my first naval build, but the German boat the LS3 will be my first naval build, my first actual boat build. This is more of a submarine. So moving on to the next one, we got the Antonov AN2. So this airplane here is a Cold War Soviet-built biplane. Now, this thing was a pretty, is one of my more favorite ones. I really do like the way this one turned out. I actually put a lot of detail into it. There is a few areas I may rework on it though. For example, the back end. Maybe I might rework the tail in the future and stuff. And then I'll show you guys how to do that. Like, I won't re-tutorial it, but I'll just tell you the changes that I've done to it. And if there's any more detail that I've left to add on the plane, I will definitely show you guys how to do it. But yeah, it's a pretty cool little build to do, and hope you guys found it cool and easy. And then we'll move on to the next build, which we did a tank. This is the M4 Sherman tank. Now this was a very easy to build machine, and the Sherman was basically one of the most mass-produced tanks other than the Soviet T-34, which will be coming up next year, 2022. So stick around for that. But more variants of the Sherman are also coming. So this one right here that I built was based off the very standard Sherman. Like, this is like the first production ones when they first saw service. But obviously there are many, many different variants of the Sherman, so I will be showing you how to build pretty well all of them, unless they're exactly identical to this. But if they have like different guns, if they have longer guns or more machine guns in places, I will definitely be building those ones. So moving on, so we got a World War I plane here. We got the Sopwith Camel, which is one of the most famous British airplanes of World War I. And I also have a Fokker DR1 tutorial, which also I am planning on redoing in the future, so stick around for that. And then you can make these two planes dogfight each other, because these saw each other in combat, so you can make your own little dogfight scenes with those two planes. I would recommend waiting for the redesigned one, but if you don't want to wait for it, I do have a tutorial for the Fokker DR1. You could just, if you go on my oldest videos or something, you should see it. But I think I might have also redone it a second time. I am unsure about that. But and also expect more of the Sopwith planes to come out. So for example, the Sopwith triplane, Sopwith pup, and also I think there was a Sopwith baby as well. So those ones will be coming up as well. So stay tuned for that. So, the next build we got is the Land Rover Defender 1972 Land Rover Defender Series 3. So this was a cool little vehicle tutorial that I've done. Expect more of these types of vehicles to come. Now, I'm planning on mostly doing the older vehicles from like the 1940s to about 1980s or so, because newer cars, especially like sports cars or like even new like SUVs, they all have these like curves and lines to them that are really hard to do in this game. So until I figure out how to do them, I do want to build more of the older vehicles because they're a lot more square and a lot more like easier to build, and they're also bigger too. So the bigger, the easier to build. So, but obviously, a lot of old cars did have some really nice curves to them and really nice features to them as well. So I'll just have to figure out how to do those. But yeah, so the Land Rover was a very nice little tutorial. A nice kind of I wouldn't say it's a van or an SUV, but it's something similar to those. But you get a nice interior space, so you get like a nice big area in the trunk and everything, and then even the driver's seat, it has the bench seat in the front, which I should probably detail the kind of the driver's area more. But yeah, it was a pretty fun little tutorial. So the next one we got is the Beachcraft 1900D. Now this one was probably one of my personal favorites. This was a redesign of the original Beachcraft that I did back 5 years ago. So, and that one was on a 1-to-1 scale, but now that I build on a 2-to-1 scale, this is what I've come up with a 2-to-1 scale. So as you can see, it looks a lot more detailed, and it has much more. It has like better wings, everything, and a better interior. It's bigger. You have more space to add stuff, and I've also added a detailed cargo area here too. And over there, I'm not going to go to it, but I did do a more like a part 2 to the tutorial, which is more detail. So I made it so the flaps are, if you want it with the flaps down, I added a couple other extra details onto it and changes even from this design. So you can check that out. So anyways, so moving on. So this aircraft is actually a unreleased one. I did do this tutorial, but accidentally deleted the video when I was deleting other stuff off my computer. So I do have to re-record this one, but luckily it's very easy to make. Now you're probably wondering, what is this? Well, this is the Christmas Bullet, which was considered to be probably the worst aircraft design ever made. It was made by a guy who had no idea how to build an airplane, but he decided to build one anyway. And let's just say it did not end well. So, and this is a biplane. Now, you probably notice right away what's wrong with it. I will get into more what's wrong with it in the tutorial, but yeah, there's a lot of issues. So, but yeah, this video was supposed to be added to my season 2 builds, but I decided to push it back to season 3 because I wanted to make more of a World War II update, and I accidentally deleted the video when I was actually recording, like after I deleted a couple failed videos. This one was kind of included, so I will be re-recording it because as you can see, it's already finished right here, but I'll just rebuild it over here. So no worries, like I will be able to bring this to you guys. But yeah, so stick around for the worst airplane tutorial ever. So, and that's actually probably what I'll call the video too. So, so anyways, the next build is another unreleased build. Now this one I didn't even actually record because as you can see, it's not broken down for the layers. But this is the Bob Simple tank. Now this was a tank developed in New Zealand by a guy named Bob Simple. Now he wanted to build a kind of a home-built tank to defend Australia, or I should say New Zealand, against the Japanese, because at the time, people that lived in New Zealand and Australia were very, very worried about a Japanese invasion after they invaded China and the Philippines, and I think a couple other places. Australia is not that far from Japan, like if you look at it. So they were afraid that the Japanese would come over and invade them. So they wanted to build their own kind of weaponry, and they came out with this. Now, when people first saw this, they literally laughed at Bob Simple for the design because, as you can see, it's a very weird-looking tank. Now there obviously is a bunch of memes to this tank being like the world's strongest tank and everything and all that stuff, but really in real life it was not very good. All these, you may think oh, it's got a lot of machine guns, so it must be good. Well, these are all 7.7mm guns, which cannot really pen through even the lightest of Japanese tanks. So only I think one or two were built, and don't know what happened to them, but they definitely never saw service. So, anyways, the next. Oh, and one more thing about this thing is expect these two to come into season 2. I mean season 3 of the build series. So this one here is the Bombardier 604 Challenger. So this is a really cool Canadian aircraft that I made, and it's basically like a business jet slash passenger jet. Now these were obviously developed into the CRJ series, which are now called the Mitsubishi CRJs, but originally they were called the Bombardier CRJs. So, but Mitsubishi now owns them. But I will be coming out with the CRJ series very soon, probably next year. And this was a really cool little tutorial. Still never got around to doing the interior. But I am planning to do an interior for this, well, at least for the CRJs, and I'll show you probably those ones. But yeah, it's a really cool little plane, and well, I should say it's a mid-size airplane kind of thing. It's definitely one of my larger builds that I've done, other than the Beachcraft. But the next, well, the one that you see over there is a bit bigger than this one, but we'll get to that in a minute. So. Yeah, it's a really cool little aircraft. I definitely recommend doing it. And if you're building an airport, this would be a perfect plane to build for it, especially if it's a smaller airport. And our next build is, which was the last build of Season 1, it was the Messerschmitt ME262, which was the world's first jet fighter. Now, it wasn't the world's first jet aircraft. That was actually developed by Heinkel, which I will be introducing probably in the next update as well. So this aircraft here was the first combat-capable jet fighter. And the 262 was a very good aircraft. It's one of my personal favorite World War II planes, other than the P-51 and the Aero Lancaster. And this was also a redesign from one of my first tutorials I've ever released on the channel. Now, before I had actually, like my very first video that I've ever released on the channel was a build of the Hindenburg that I did, the big Zeppelin from the 30s. Now, obviously that tutorial will never come out because it's, the build is long lost. It's like I've deleted the build since because it wasn't very good. But I am planning on doing the Hindenburg one day as a tutorial, and yeah, I just have to redesign it. But we're going to be doing some other Zeppelins beforehand, so I don't want to talk too much about that. We'll discuss that later. But that's hint to what's coming out in the future. So, but anyways, so yeah, the 262, very cool plane. I definitely recommend doing it, and it's very easy to make. There's only like 2 layers to it, and yeah, it's an awesome tutorial. So then I released the first kind of big build of the after season 1, because actually after every season there's always going to be kind of a big build attached to it to kind of finish off that season. So we've done a long requested and long awaited plane, the Mitsubishi G4M1. So this aircraft is basically a Japanese medium bomber from World War II, and ever since I've done my Yokosuka Oka tutorial, people have been requesting me to build the bomber, and 3 years later, it's finally here. So you can check out this tutorial on my channel. So yeah, and also you can also check out the Oka tutorial as well. So very cool plane. And but I am planning on doing some more stuff with this plane. Like, just because the tutorial is done doesn't mean I'm necessarily finished with the aircraft. There is still more I'm planning on doing with it. So the next build, and the kind of the first build of season 2, is this thing. Now this thing may look very similar to the 262 because it is the well, it's not actually a 262, but it's similar to it. It's the Japanese version of it, called the Nakajima Kika. So this aircraft was basically designed by the 262. Like, basically, the Germans gave the Japanese plans to build the 262. However, the Japanese decided to upgrade the design a little bit, so they put their own engines on it, and they made it smaller, But the Kika actually ended up being a slightly better airplane than the 262. It was faster, it was more maneuverable, but the only thing the 262 had over the Kika was the armament. The 262 had much more armament and heavier guns than the Kika, but the Kika still had two 30mm cannons, which obviously would be disastrous if it hit a bomber, which specifically would be like the B-29, which is what this thing was designed to shoot down. But yeah, it's a really cool plane, just like the 262. It's a really cool plane, and also I definitely, and now I have both the ME262 and the Nakajima Kika, so you can build both of them. So the next build, and my most recent tutorial, is this one, the Mitsubishi A6M0. Now this is a redesign of two other builds that I've actually done. So originally, about 3 years ago, 4 years ago or so, 3 or 4 years ago, I've released a Zero tutorial. Now that one was very, it was way out of scale. It looked very bad, and I just didn't like it. So I've redone it, I think about a year later, and that one was slightly better, but it still had some flaws in the design. So now that I've also obviously upgraded my building standards, I have redone the Zero a third time. And this is what it now looks like. So it's more up to date with my current building styles, and obviously with my other fighter planes that you will be seeing in the future. So, and I've also added a few other features to it. Like I changed the propeller, I've added a pitot tube, and a drop tank, which I do realize in the tutorial I actually forgot to show you how to do the drop tank, but it's really easy. You just skip one block, you place a slab, and you make this a double slab, put another slab underneath, and then you just go out with 2 double slabs like that. So it's very, very easy to do. And there was also some stuff about the Zero that I found out, which I had never known it had folding wingtips. So that's pretty cool how it has that. So yeah, so definitely check that tutorial out if you really like the Zero. So this build here, this last one, this is actually an unreleased tutorial, which will be my next tutorial that I'm going to be releasing. Now, if you've checked out my 12 builds video for Season 2, you'll know that the third one, we were supposed to have the Kika, Zero, and then the Mitsubishi G4M. But I've realized since I've already released quite a few Japanese planes, I decided to switch, because the very last build that I introduced was the Maki C200. But I decided to give it a little bit of a switch to add a bit more diversity into my builds. What I mean by that is, like, instead of just having all one, instead of having just a bunch of Japanese planes, I decided to throw an Italian plane in there. And a lot of you guys in the comments section really, really want me to release Italian planes, so I decided to do a switch to them. And just for a little heads up, a little hint for the future, at the end of Season 2, when I do my big build, it may or may not be an Italian bomber. So stay tuned for that. But as you can see over here, I've already completed the tutorial, and I've done a couple changes to it in the tutorial. I've added a few extra little details. So this tutorial will not be released tomorrow. I'm planning for a New Year's video about, obviously, my talks about what I'm planning for 2022. Probably around January 2nd or January 3rd, expect to see this video. It's already uploaded, but I just got to do the thumbnail for it. I also got to do all the description and all that kind of stuff. But the video is already uploaded. It's already finished processing. So expect to see this very, very soon. So that concludes basically all of the builds for 2021. So it was we had a pretty good time, and I definitely enjoyed doing a lot of these builds throughout the time, basically from September to now. 2022 will be my first full year back on YouTube since I think 2017. So, or 2016 I should say, because I just released one video in 2017, and that's when I took a very long break. But yeah, so expect to see a lot of new types of content coming up on the channel in 2022, and also bigger builds as well. I kind of wanted to start off small just to kind of get back into YouTube, although there's a couple big ones that you've seen that I've released. But expect a bit larger airplanes to come up in the new year, and also a couple larger ships, I should say. And yes, there will be some naval vessels, but don't only expect naval vessels, but also expect a couple civilian vessels as well. So stay tuned for that. And also, I think I just mentioned larger planes will also be included, and larger and more modern tanks as well, and a couple other new builds that I want to introduce, a couple other new stuff. So, anyways, look forward to the new year, and Happy New Year's to everybody, and hopefully you have a good, safe new year, and I'll see you back in 2022 later.